Billionaire fired Black Maid for hugging his disabled son, until he found the heartbreaking reason why. "Get your filthy hands off my son." The words exploded through the marble-floored foyer of the Harrison mansion like gunshots, shattering the afternoon silence and sending shockwaves through every corner of the 60-room estate. Victoria Sterling stood in the archway of the main living room, her perfectly manicured finger pointed like a weapon at the scene before her, her red designer dress a slash of fury against the pristine white walls. Diane Foster froze where she knelt on the hardwood floor, her arms still wrapped protectively around 8-year-old Michael Harrison, whose small body had been convulsing with seizure just moments before. The boy's breathing was finally steady again, his eyes fluttering open as consciousness returned, but Diane didn't dare move away from him, not when she could still feel the tremors running through his thin frame. "Ma'am, please," Diane said quietly, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. "Michael just had a seizure. I was keeping him safe until—" "Safe?" Victoria's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "You call manhandling a disabled child safe? Robert, get in here. Now." Heavy footsteps thundered across the marble as Robert Harrison, tech billionaire and Michael's father, appeared in the doorway. His 6-foot frame filled the space as his gray eyes took in the scene. His 8-year-old son, born with cerebral palsy and dependent on leg braces to walk, lying in the arms of their African-American housemaid, both of them on the floor in what looked like an intimate, inappropriate embrace. "What the hell is going on here?" Robert's voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to commanding boardrooms and bending corporations to his will. Diane felt her heart hammer against her ribs as she looked up at Robert's face, seeing suspicion and rage building in his expression. She had worked for the Harrison family for 8 months, and in all that time, she had never seen Robert look at her with anything but polite appreciation for her work. Now, his eyes held the kind of cold fury that destroyed careers and ruined lives. "She was all over Michael when I walked in," Victoria continued, her voice dripping with theatrical horror. "Holding him down, restraining him. The poor child was struggling to get away from her." "That's not true," Diane said desperately, still not daring to release Michael from her protective hold. "He had a grand mal seizure. I was preventing him from injuring himself during the episode. Look," she gestured toward the coffee table corner that Michael had been heading toward when the seizure struck. "If he had hit that edge during the convulsions—" But Robert wasn't looking at the furniture. His attention was fixed on the sight of his vulnerable son in the arms of an employee he suddenly realized he barely knew, a woman whose background check had revealed a history he had chosen to overlook 8 months ago when his desperation for reliable help had outweighed his caution. Michael stirred in Diane's arms, his voice weak and confused as consciousness fully returned. "Diane? What happened? Why is everyone shouting?" The trust in the child's voice, the way he instinctively sought comfort from Diane rather than his father, seemed to strike Robert like a physical blow. His face darkened as he stepped into the room. "Let go of my son," he said quietly, his voice carrying more menace than any shout. "Right now." "Mr. Harrison, please," Diane said, finally loosening her hold on Michael but staying close as the boy struggled to sit up. "He's still disoriented from the seizure. What he needs is to be away from you." Robert moved forward and scooped Michael into his arms, the boy's leg braces clanking softly against his father's suit. "Victoria, call Dr. Matthews. Tell him we need him here immediately." "Already done," Victoria said smugly, her phone already in her hand. "And Robert? I think we should call the police as well. This kind of inappropriate contact with a disabled child. There are laws about these things." Diane felt the blood drain from her face as she understood the implication. Victoria wasn't just accusing her of incompetence, she was suggesting something far more sinister, something that would destroy not just her job but her entire life. "Mrs. Sterling, I would never hurt Michael," Diane said, climbing to her feet on shaking legs. "I love that little boy. I've been taking care of him for—" "Taking care of him?" Victoria's voice rose to a shriek. Is that what you call it? Restraining him on the floor? Having him call you by your first name like your family? The inappropriate attachment you've been fostering. Michael, still confused and frightened by the adult emotions swirling around him, turned in his father's arms to look at Diane. Daddy, why is Miss Victoria being mean to Diane? Diane helps me when I feel scared. The innocence in Michael's voice seemed to fuel Robert's anger rather than calm it. His son's obvious attachment to their employee, the trust and affection in the child's eyes when he looked at Diane, felt like a betrayal of everything Robert thought he knew about his own family. Pack your things, Robert said to Diane, his voice cold enough to freeze fire. I want you out of this house within the hour. Mr. Harrison, please, if you'll just let me explain. There's nothing to explain. Robert's grip tightened on Michael, who was beginning to whimper with confusion and exhaustion. I trusted you with my son, and I find you in a position that any reasonable parent would find concerning. I was helping him, Diane repeated desperately. Ask Michael. Ask him what happened. But Victoria was already moving to intercept that possibility. Robert, the child is clearly confused and probably traumatized. We shouldn't be interrogating him right now. What we should be doing is getting her out of here before she can spin this situation to her advantage. As Diane looked around the room, at Robert's implacable face, at Victoria's triumphant expression, at Michael's frightened eyes, she realized that nothing she could say would change the narrative that was already forming in their minds. The truth didn't matter. What mattered was what the scene had looked like to people determined to see the worst possible interpretation. I'll get my things, Diane said quietly, her dignity the only thing she had left to cling to. As she walked toward the servants' quarters to collect her belongings, Michael's voice followed her down the hallway, high and desperate. Diane, don't go. Who's going to help me when I get scared at night? Who's going to read me the good stories? Diane didn't turn around, couldn't trust herself not to break down completely if she saw the confusion and abandonment in that little boy's eyes. But her heart shattered as she heard Robert's sharp response. Diane isn't part of our family, Michael. She was just an employee, and employees can be replaced. What Robert Harrison didn't know, what he couldn't have known as he watched the woman who had become his son's anchor walk out of their lives, was that he had just fired the only person who understood that Michael's seizures were getting worse because someone was tampering with his medication. The only person who had been secretly documenting the concerning changes in Michael's condition since Victoria Sterling had moved into their lives 6 months ago. The only person who knew that Victoria had been slowly poisoning his son, using medications that triggered seizures and brain damage, positioning herself to inherit everything when the tragic medical complications finally claimed Michael's life. But the truth has a way of surfacing, even when powerful people try to bury it. And Michael Harrison, despite his young age and physical challenges, was about to become the key to exposing a conspiracy that reached deeper into his family's life than anyone could have imagined. Because some bonds between a protector and a child transcend employment, survive false accusations, and burn stronger than the lies told to destroy them. Before we dive into this incredible story, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is over there. Drop it in the comments below. It always amazes me how far these stories travel, from the US to Canada, the UK, Africa, and beyond. And while you're here, don't forget to hit subscribe and give this video a like so you won't miss the next story. Now let's get started. Have you ever been in a situation where doing the right thing looked wrong to everyone watching? Sometimes our most heroic moments are the ones that get us in the most trouble. Share in the comments about a time when you were misunderstood for trying to help someone. Diane Foster sat in her decade-old Honda Civic in the parking lot of St. Catherine's Community Center, staring at the severance check Robert Harrison had pressed into her hands with the cold efficiency of a man disposing of unwanted property. The amount was generous, 3 months' salary plus what he called consideration for your discretion, but the money felt like blood money, payment for her silence about what she had witnessed in the Harrison household. At 45, Diane had thought she was done starting over. She had spent the last 20 years building a reputation as one of the most reliable in-home caregivers in the city, specializing in children with disabilities and complex medical needs. Her references were impeccable, her background spotless except for a single arrest 15 years ago when she had been caught shoplifting diapers for her own son during a particularly desperate period. That son, Marcus, was now 23 and serving his second tour in Afghanistan with the Army Rangers. Diane's fierce protectiveness and unwavering advocacy had helped him overcome his own learning disabilities to become a confident young man who called her every Sunday without fail. It was Marcus who had taught her that loving a child with special needs required not just compassion, but courage, the willingness to fight systems, challenge assumptions, and never accept, "There's nothing more we can do," as a final answer. Michael Harrison had awakened those same protective instincts from the moment Diane met him 8 months ago. The little boy's cerebral palsy affected his mobility and caused periodic seizures, but his mind was sharp as a blade and his spirit unbroken despite the challenges his body presented. He was curious about everything, asking endless questions about how things worked, why people behaved the way they did, and whether his condition would get better as he grew older. Diane had fallen in love with Michael's fierce independence, his refusal to be pitted or treated as fragile, and his remarkable ability to find joy in small victories. When he managed to walk across a room without his braces, when he completed a puzzle that was supposedly too advanced for his age, when he made her laugh with his surprisingly sophisticated observations about the adults around him, these moments had become the highlights of Diane's days. But it was the nights that had truly bonded them. Michael suffered from severe anxiety that often manifested as panic attacks, particularly in the dark hours when his medical condition made sleep elusive. Diane had developed a routine of sitting with him during these episodes, reading stories and helping him practice the breathing exercises that calmed his racing heart. It was during these quiet conversations that Michael had begun confiding his fears about Victoria Sterling, the woman who had moved into his father's life 6 months ago with the stealth of a predator and the charm of a movie star. Victoria was everything Diane was not: young, blonde, breathtakingly beautiful, and possessed of the kind of effortless sophistication that comes from generations of wealth and privilege. She had positioned herself as Robert's girlfriend and Michael's potential stepmother with strategic precision, always appearing devoted and nurturing when Robert was present while revealing her true nature only when they were alone. Diane had documented dozens of concerning incidents in a notebook she kept hidden in her room. Victoria accidentally giving Michael the wrong medication, Victoria locking him in his room as punishment for minor infractions, Victoria telling the 8-year-old that his disability embarrassed his father and made him a burden on the family. Most disturbing was the pattern Diane had noticed in Michael's seizures. They had become more frequent and severe since Victoria's arrival, despite adjustments to his medication regimen. The seizures often occurred shortly after Victoria had been alone with Michael, and they seemed to coincide with periods when Robert was traveling for business. 2 weeks ago, Diane had made a discovery that chilled her to the bone. While cleaning Victoria's bathroom, she had found a small bottle of pills hidden behind expensive cosmetics, pills that were definitely not prescribed for Victoria but that looked suspiciously similar to anti-seizure medications. When Diane researched the numbers stamped on the pills, she discovered they were actually seizure-inducing drugs, medications that would trigger exactly the kind of episodes Michael had been experiencing. Diane had been planning to approach Robert with her concerns when today's seizure had changed everything. Now she was locked out of the Harrison mansion, banned from contact with Michael, and facing the possibility of criminal charges if Victoria decided to follow through on her threats. Her phone buzzed with a text from her neighbor. "Saw the news van outside your apartment. Everything okay?" Diane's stomach dropped as she realized Victoria's threat to involve the police hadn't been idle. She quickly opened her news app and felt the world tilt beneath her as she read the breaking story. Disabled child allegedly assaulted by caregiver in wealthy home. The article was brief but devastating, describing how Michael Harrison had been found in a compromising position with his caregiver, leading to her immediate dismissal and a police investigation. It mentioned Diane's shoplifting arrest from 15 years ago and quoted sources close to the family expressing concern about Michael's inappropriate attachment to his former caregiver. The sources, Diane knew, were Victoria Sterling. As Diane read the article, her phone began ringing with calls from reporters wanting her side of the story. She declined them all, knowing that anything she said would only feed the media frenzy that Victoria had deliberately created. But as the afternoon wore on and more news outlets picked up the story, Diane began to understand the full scope of Victoria's strategy. This wasn't just about getting Diane fired, it was about destroying her reputation so completely that even if Robert discovered the truth about his son's medication, no one would believe the word of a disgraced caregiver with a history of criminal behavior. That evening, as Diane sat in her small apartment trying to figure out her next move, she received an unexpected phone call. The voice on the other end was elderly but sharp, belonging to someone she hadn't spoken to in months. "Ms. Foster? This is Dr. Elena Martinez. I was Michael Harrison's neurologist before the family switched to Dr. Peterson 6 months ago." Diane's heart leaped with hope. "Dr. Martinez, I remember you. You were wonderful with Michael. I've been following his case from a distance, and I have to say, I'm concerned about the changes in his treatment protocol. The new medications Dr. Peterson prescribed don't make sense given Michael's specific type of cerebral palsy." Dr. Martinez explained that she had been trying to reach Robert to discuss her concerns, but her calls had been deflected by Victoria, who claimed to be handling all of Michael's medical coordination. "Ms. Foster, I need to ask you something confidentially. Have you noticed any changes in Michael's seizure patterns? Any correlation with when he receives his medications?" As Diane shared her observations with the doctor, both women began to piece together a pattern that was far more sinister than medical malpractice. Victoria hadn't just been neglecting Michael's care, she had been systematically poisoning him, using medications that would cause brain damage and eventually death while positioning herself to inherit Robert's fortune as his grieving widow and Michael's devoted stepmother. "We need evidence," Dr. Martinez said grimly. "And we need to get that child away from her before it's too late." But even as they made plans to expose Victoria's crimes, neither woman could know that 3 miles away, Michael lay in his bed asking the question that would haunt his father's dreams. "Daddy, when is Diane coming back? I don't feel safe when she's not here." Sometimes the people who know a child best are the ones who are pushed furthest away when danger strikes. Have you ever been in a situation where speaking up for a vulnerable person put your own reputation at risk? Share your thoughts about the courage it takes to be an advocate for those who can't protect themselves. The emergency call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, shattering the silence of Dr. Elena Martinez's home office where she had been reviewing Michael Harrison's old medical files by lamplight. The voice on the other end belonged to Patricia Williams, the night nurse at St. Mary's Children's Hospital. "Dr. Martinez, I'm calling about Michael Harrison. He was brought in an hour ago with status epilepticus, continuous seizures that won't stop. We've administered 3 rounds of medication, but he's not responding to treatment." Dr. Martinez felt ice form in her veins. Status epilepticus was a medical emergency that could cause permanent brain damage or death if not controlled quickly. What triggered the episode? The family says he had been complaining of stomach pain earlier in the evening. His stepmother gave him what she described as herbal stomach medicine, and the seizures started about an hour later. "Stepmother?" Dr. Martinez frowned. "Michael's parents aren't married." "Sorry, the woman with him, Victoria Sterling. She's been making all the medical decisions since they arrived. The father seems distressed. He keeps asking for someone named Diane." Dr. Martinez felt puzzle pieces clicking together in her mind. "Patricia, I need you to do something for me, very carefully and very quietly. I want you to get a sample of whatever medication Victoria Sterling gave Michael tonight. Tell her it's for allergy testing or drug interaction screening, whatever you need to say to get that sample." "Dr. Martinez, that's highly irregular. Patricia, I have reason to believe this child is being poisoned." That medication sample could save his life. 20 minutes later, Dr. Martinez was in her car speeding toward the hospital, her phone buzzing with a call from Diane Foster. "Dr. Martinez, I just got a call from a reporter asking for comment about Michael's hospitalization." "What's happening?" "Meet me at St. Mary's," Dr. Martinez said grimly. "And bring that notebook you told me about, the one with your observations about Michael's seizure patterns." When they arrived at the hospital, the pediatric ICU was buzzing with activity. Through the window of room 12, they could see Michael lying unconscious on the bed, surrounded by monitors and 4 lines, his small body dwarfed by the medical equipment keeping him alive. Robert Harrison sat in a chair beside the bed, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled, his face gray with exhaustion and fear. Victoria Sterling stood behind him, one perfectly manicured hand on his shoulder in a gesture of support that looked staged for the benefit of the medical staff. "I can't go in there," Diane said quietly, watching the scene through the window. "Hospital security has orders to call the police if I try to approach Michael." "Then we'll have to work from out here," Dr. Martinez replied, pulling out her phone to call Patricia Williams. The night nurse met them in the hallway with the medication sample Victoria had provided, along with Michael's latest test results. What Dr. Martinez saw in the lab report made her blood run cold. His blood shows traces of phenytoin, but not the therapeutic levels you'd expect from his prescribed medication, she explained to Diane. "Instead, there are elevated levels of what looks like, this can't be right." She ran the numbers again, double-checking her calculations. "Diane, someone gave this child massive doses of proconvulsant drugs, medications specifically designed to trigger seizures. This isn't accidental overdose or medical error. This is attempted murder." Through the ICU window, they watched Victoria lean down to whisper something in Robert's ear, her expression a perfect mask of concerned devotion. But when she thought no one was looking, Diane caught a glimpse of something else in Victoria's eyes, satisfaction. "She's enjoying this," Diane whispered, horrified. "She's actually enjoying watching that little boy suffer." Dr. Martinez was already on her phone with the hospital's chief of staff, demanding an immediate investigation and police involvement. But even as she spoke, Victoria was smoothly extricating herself from the ICU, claiming she needed to make calls to notify family members about Michael's condition. "Where is she going?" Diane asked, but her question was answered when Victoria appeared in the hallway outside the ICU, her expression transforming from worried girlfriend to cold predator the moment she thought she was alone. Victoria pulled out her phone and made a call, her voice low but carrying clearly in the hospital's acoustic environment. "It's me. The seizures are worse this time. He's not waking up. The doctors say there might be permanent brain damage." "Yes, I know that's what we wanted, but Robert is starting to ask questions about the timing." "No, I got rid of the caregiver, but now there's some doctors sniffing around asking about medication changes." Diane felt Dr. Martinez grab her arm as they both listened to Victoria casually discussing Michael's condition like a business transaction, revealing the full scope of her calculated plan to murder the child for his inheritance. "I need you to be patient," Victoria continued into the phone. "Once the boy is gone, Robert will be completely dependent on me for emotional support. The grief will make him more compliant, easier to manipulate. And with the right legal arrangements, I'll inherit everything when he inevitably follows his son." Dr. Martinez was already recording the conversation on her phone, capturing every damning word as Victoria revealed not just her plans for Michael, but her ultimate intention to eliminate Robert as well. But their covert operation was interrupted when Victoria suddenly turned around and saw them standing in the hallway. Her face went white, then red with rage as she realized they had overheard everything. "You," she hissed at Diane. "I told you to stay away from this family." "And I told the police you were dangerous," Diane replied, stepping forward with newfound courage. "Did you really think you could poison a child and get away with it?" Victoria's mask slipped completely, revealing the venomous hatred beneath her beautiful facade. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." That retarded little brat has ruined everything, but I'm not finished yet. Yes, you are, said a voice behind them. All three women turned to see Detective Sarah Chen approaching with two uniformed officers, having been called by Dr. Martinez's urgent report about suspected child abuse. Victoria Sterling, you're under arrest for attempted murder, child endangerment, and conspiracy, Detective Chen announced, pulling out her handcuffs. As Victoria was led away in restraints, her final words echoed through the hospital hallway, "You think you've won, but Robert will never believe you over me. That child will never be safe as long as I have connections in this city." But Victoria had underestimated one crucial factor in her elaborate scheme. In the ICU room behind them, Robert Harrison had heard every word of her phone conversation through the baby monitor that hospital staff used to communicate between rooms. He knew the truth now, and he was about to do something that would change everything for everyone involved. Sometimes the people who seem most devoted to a child are actually their greatest threat. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted completely was not who they appeared to be? Share your thoughts about recognizing the signs when someone's care and concern might be hiding darker motives. Robert Harrison stood outside the pediatric ICU at 6 a.m., his expensive suit wrinkled from a sleepless night in a hospital chair, his hands shaking as he held the phone that had captured Victoria's confession. The woman he had trusted with his son's life, the woman he had been considering marrying, had just been arrested for attempting to murder the most precious person in his world. Detective Chen found him there, staring through the window at Michael's still form surrounded by medical equipment. "Mr. Harrison, I need to ask you some questions about Victoria Sterling and her access to your son's medications." Robert turned, and Detective Chen was struck by the haunted look in his eyes. "Detective, I heard everything. The phone conversation, her plans, all of it. I've been a fool. Sir, right now we need to focus on building a case that will keep Victoria away from your son permanently. Can you walk me through the timeline of when Michael's seizures started getting worse?" Over the next hour, Robert painfully reconstructed the past 6 months, realizing how blind he had been to the signs that should have been obvious. Michael's increasing anxiety around Victoria, the child's reluctance to take his medicine when Victoria administered it, the way Michael had repeatedly asked for Diane during his most vulnerable moments. "There's something else," Robert said quietly. "Diane Foster, the caregiver I fired yesterday. She tried to warn me about Victoria weeks ago. She said she had concerns about Michael's medication schedule, about changes in his behavior. I thought she was jealous of Victoria's place in our lives." Detective Chen consulted her notes. "Ms. Foster has been cooperating with our investigation. She provided detailed documentation of suspicious incidents going back months. Without her records, we might not have been able to identify the pattern of poisoning." "I need to see her," Robert said. "I need to apologize and ask her to come back. Michael's been asking for her constantly, even in his unconscious state. He keeps calling her name." But reconciliation would prove more complicated than Robert anticipated. When he called Diane's number, the phone went straight to voicemail. When he drove to her apartment building, the landlord informed him that she had moved out overnight, leaving no forwarding address. "A bunch of reporters were harassing the other tenants," the landlord explained. "She said she couldn't put everyone else at risk by staying here." Robert felt panic rising in his chest. Victoria's arrest had made headlines, and the media was painting the story as a conspiracy thriller with Diane as the heroic whistleblower. But the attention was clearly more than Diane could handle, and now she had disappeared just when Michael needed her most. Dr. Martinez found Robert in the hospital parking lot 3 hours later, sitting in his car with his head in his hands. "Mr. Harrison, Michael is asking for you. He's finally awake and coherent." Robert rushed back to the ICU, where his son was sitting up in bed looking pale but alert. The moment Michael saw his father, tears began streaming down his face. "Daddy, where's Diane? The nurses say she can't come see me, but I don't understand why. Did I do something wrong?" Robert felt his heart break as he realized he would have to explain to his 8-year-old son that the woman who had become his primary source of comfort and security was gone, and that it was Robert's fault. "Michael, Daddy made a mistake. A big mistake. I thought Diane had hurt you, but she was actually trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" Robert struggled with how much truth an 8-year-old could handle. "From someone who wanted to make you sick. But Diane figured it out and tried to tell me, and I didn't listen." Michael's eyes widened with understanding beyond his years. "Victoria. It was Victoria, wasn't it? She always made me feel scared, but she was nice when you were watching." The conversation was interrupted by Dr. Martinez, who entered with test results that provided both hope and concern. "The good news is that Michael's brain scans show no permanent damage from the seizures. His body is processing the toxic medications out of his system, and with proper treatment, he should make a full recovery." "And the bad news?" Robert asked. "The psychological trauma may take longer to heal. Michael has been living in a state of chronic fear and anxiety for months. He's going to need intensive therapy, and most importantly, he's going to need the people he trusts most to be part of his recovery process." As if to underscore her point, Michael spoke up from his hospital bed. "I want Diane to come back. She's the only one who makes me feel safe." That afternoon brought more complications. Robert's lawyer arrived with news that Victoria's arrest had triggered a media frenzy that threatened to overwhelm everyone involved. "The story is going viral," the lawyer explained. "Social media is calling it everything from the Poison Prince to Maid's intuition saves disabled boy. Diane Foster is being hailed as a hero, but she's also being scrutinized intensely. Every detail of her life is being dissected by strangers." Robert realized that his firing of Diane had inadvertently made her the center of a media storm she never wanted. The woman who had tried to save his son was now being punished with unwanted fame and invasion of privacy. "I have to find her," Robert said. "I have to make this right." But finding Diane proved more difficult than expected. She had effectively disappeared, and Robert began to understand that his betrayal had driven away the one person Michael needed most. Meanwhile, at St. Catherine's Community Center across town, Diane sat in a basement room that served as a temporary shelter for people in crisis situations. She had been forced to abandon her apartment, her job references were worthless after the media coverage, and she was starting over from nothing again. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, book agents, and television producers wanting to turn her story into entertainment. But all Diane could think about was Michael, lying in a hospital bed asking for someone who couldn't be there for him. Father Miguel Santos, who ran the community center, found her staring at news coverage of Victoria's arrest. "She tried to kill him," Diane said quietly. "That little boy who never hurt anyone, who just wanted to feel safe and loved. She was slowly poisoning him, and I was the only one who noticed. And now she's in jail because you were brave enough to speak up," Father Miguel replied. "You saved that child's life." "But at what cost?" Diane asked. "I can't see him, can't comfort him when he's scared. His father will never trust me again after what happened. And Victoria has connections. She threatened that this wasn't over." As if summoned by her words, Diane's phone rang with a call from an unknown number. When she answered, a cold female voice said, "You think you won, but this is far from over. I have friends in high places, and they don't appreciate people who interfere with business arrangements." The line went dead, leaving Diane staring at her phone with growing dread. Victoria might be in jail, but she had allies, people who had helped her with previous schemes, people who had their own reasons to ensure Diane stayed silent about what she had discovered. The war for Michael's safety was far from over, and the battle lines were being drawn around a vulnerable child who just wanted the woman who understood him to come home. Sometimes saving someone means losing everything else in your life. Have you ever had to choose between doing what's right and protecting your own security? Share your thoughts about the personal cost of being an advocate for those who can't protect themselves. The breakthrough came at 3 a.m. on Thursday morning, When Michael Harrison woke from a nightmare screaming for Diane with such desperation that the night nurses couldn't calm him down. His heart rate spiked dangerously high, his breathing became labored, and no amount of medical intervention could break through the panic attack that gripped his small body. Robert, who had been maintaining a bedside vigil since Victoria's arrest 2 days earlier, watched helplessly as his son thrashed against the hospital bed restraints, calling for the woman who had become his emotional anchor. "Please," Michael sobbed, his voice hoarse from crying. "I need Diane. She knows what to do when I get scared. She knows the breathing song." Dr. Martinez, summoned by the alarmed nursing staff, took one look at Michael's vital signs and made a decision that would change everything. "Mr. Harrison," she said quietly, "we need to get Diane Foster here immediately. This child is experiencing severe psychological trauma from being separated from his primary attachment figure. If we can't stabilize his emotional state, the physical stress could trigger another seizure episode." "I've been trying to find her for 2 days," Robert said desperately. "She's disappeared completely. The media attention drove her into hiding." "Then we find her another way," Dr. Martinez replied, pulling out her phone to call Detective Chen. Within an hour, police had traced Diane's location through her emergency contact at St. Catherine's Community Center. But when Father Miguel Santos received the call asking him to bring Diane to the hospital, he hesitated. "She's been through hell," he told Detective Chen. "The reporters, the death threats, the complete disruption of her life. I'm not sure she's emotionally prepared to walk back into that situation." But when Father Miguel explained the situation to Diane, her response was immediate and fierce. "Michael needs me," she said simply. "Nothing else matters." The reunion in Michael's hospital room was both heartbreaking and healing. The moment Diane appeared in the doorway, Michael's vital signs began to stabilize, his breathing slowed, and for the first time in days, the terror left his eyes. "Diane," he whispered, reaching out with trembling arms. "You came back." "I'll always come back for you, sweetheart," Diane said, moving to his bedside and taking his small hands in hers. "Always." Robert watched from across the room as his son melted into Diane's embrace, finally finding the peace that no medical intervention had been able to provide. The sight filled him with gratitude, shame, and a growing understanding of just how badly he had misjudged the situation. But it was what happened next that provided the revelation that would change everything. As Diane held Michael and whispered the breathing song that calmed his anxiety, the little boy began to speak in the halting way of a child unburdening himself of terrible secrets. "Diane, Victoria told me not to tell anyone about the special medicine she gave me. She said Daddy would be angry if he knew I was being bad and making myself sick." Diane's blood ran cold, but she kept her voice gentle and encouraging. "What special medicine, sweetheart?" "The pills that tasted funny. Not like my regular seizure medicine. Victoria said they were vitamins to make me stronger, but they made me feel dizzy and scared instead." Robert stepped closer, his face pale with understanding. "Michael, when did Victoria give you these special pills?" "Lots of times. Especially when you went on business trips. She said it was our secret game and that I shouldn't tell you or the doctors because they wouldn't understand." Dr. Martinez was already taking notes, recognizing the classic pattern of how predators groom their victims to keep silent about abuse. But Michael wasn't finished with his revelations. "And she showed me pictures on her phone," he continued, his voice growing smaller. "Pictures of other kids who got sick because they told secrets about their medicine. She said the same thing would happen to me if I wasn't a good boy." The room fell silent except for the beeping of monitors and the sound of Robert's sharp intake of breath. Victoria hadn't just been poisoning his son, she had been psychologically terrorizing him, using fear and manipulation to ensure his silence about her crimes. "There's more," Michael whispered, glancing nervously at his father before focusing on Diane. "Victoria had meetings with a man. He came to the house when Daddy was gone, and they talked about money and papers and what would happen when I got too sick to get better." Diane felt her heart break for this little boy who had been carrying such terrible secrets. "Michael, you are so brave for telling us this. None of what Victoria did was your fault." But Michael's revelations weren't over. In the halting voice of a traumatized child, he described overhearing conversations between Victoria and her mysterious accomplice, conversations about life insurance policies, inheritance laws, and timeline for when his medical complications would become fatal. "She talked about Daddy getting sick too after I was gone," Michael said, his voice barely audible. "She said the sadness would make him weak, and then she could take care of everything." Robert felt the room spin around him as he realized the full scope of Victoria's plan. She hadn't just been targeting Michael, she had been planning to eliminate them both, making it look like a father's grief-driven decline following his disabled son's tragic death. Dr. Martinez was already on the phone with Detective Chen, relaying Michael's testimony and requesting immediate protection for both father and son. Victoria might be in jail, but her accomplice was still at large, and there was no way to know how far the conspiracy extended. But as the medical team and police worked to ensure the Harrison family's safety, something beautiful was happening in the hospital room. Michael, finally free to speak the truth about his ordeal, was finding healing in Diane's protective presence. "I knew you would figure out the truth," he told her, his small hand clasping hers with surprising strength. "Even when Daddy didn't believe me, I knew you would keep me safe." Robert approached the bedside hesitantly, his eyes filled with tears of shame and gratitude. "Diane, I owe you an apology that I can never adequately make. I failed my son and I failed you. You saved his life, and I repaid you by destroying your reputation and driving you away." Diane looked at this man who had once thrown her out of his house in rage, who had accused her of harming the child she loved, and saw genuine remorse in his expression. "Robert, you were trying to protect Michael the only way you knew how. Any parent would have reacted the same way to what appeared to be a compromising situation." "No," Robert said firmly. "A good parent would have listened when someone who clearly loved their child tried to warn them about danger. I let my prejudices and assumptions cloud my judgment, and Michael almost died because of it." He paused, looking at his son who was finally sleeping peacefully in Diane's arms. "I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course. Do you love my son?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications about the future and the possibility of healing. "Yes," Diane said simply. "I love Michael like he's my own child. I would do anything to protect him and help him thrive." "Then I want to offer you something that goes beyond employment," Robert said. "I want to make you Michael's legal guardian, with full parental rights and decision-making authority. Not as my employee, but as his co-parent." Diane stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Robert, that's a huge responsibility. And legally complex." "It's also the right thing to do," Robert said. "Michael needs advocates who will never stop fighting for him, people who understand that his disability doesn't make him less valuable or less deserving of protection. You've already proven you'll risk everything for his well-being." As they talked through the implications of shared custody and legal guardianship, Michael stirred in Diane's arms and spoke without opening his eyes. "Does this mean Diane gets to stay forever? And she can make the scary dreams go away?" "Yes, sweetheart," Diane whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm never leaving you again. Sometimes the children who need us most are the ones who teach us what real love looks like." Have you ever found that protecting someone else's child felt as natural as protecting your own? Share your thoughts about how love creates family bonds that transcend biology. The attack came not through violence, but through the legal system that was supposed to protect vulnerable children. 3 days after Robert's offer to make Diane Michael's legal co-guardian, a process server appeared at the hospital with documents that turned their world upside down. "Emergency custody petition," Detective Chen explained grimly as she reviewed the paperwork. "Filed by someone claiming to represent Michael's best interests and alleging that both Robert Harrison and Diane Foster pose a danger to the child." Robert stared at the legal documents with growing horror. Who filed this? Victoria's in jail. The petition was filed by a law firm called Sterling and Associates, Detective Chen read. They're claiming that Michael has been subjected to ongoing trauma and inappropriate emotional manipulation by adults who have compromised his psychological development. Diane felt ice form in her veins as she recognized the name. Sterling and Associates was Victoria's family law firm, the same firm that had helped her with previous schemes in other states. Victoria might be behind bars, but her network of corrupt enablers was still operational. Dr. Martinez entered the hospital room carrying her own set of legal papers, her expression grim. I've been served with a subpoena demanding all of Michael's medical records and questioning my fitness to continue as his treating physician. They're claiming I've been influenced by external parties in my medical decisions. The scope of the attack was becoming clear. Victoria's allies were trying to systematically remove everyone who had protected Michael, leaving him vulnerable to a new custody arrangement that would put him in the hands of people loyal to Victoria's interests. There's more, Detective Chin continued. The petition claims that Michael's recovery has been artificially accelerated through inappropriate emotional dependency on his former caregiver. They're arguing that the attachment between Michael and Diane is psychologically harmful and should be severed immediately. That's insane, Robert said. Anyone can see that Michael is thriving with Diane's support. Unfortunately, the family court judge who's been assigned to this case has a reputation for making decisions based on traditional family structures rather than what's actually best for the children involved, Detective Chen explained. And the lawyer representing the petition has experience in manipulating these situations. That afternoon brought news that shattered what remained of their hope. A court-appointed child psychologist arrived to evaluate Michael, accompanied by a social worker whose questions revealed the true nature of the attack they were facing. Michael, the psychologist said in a saccharine voice that immediately put the 8-year-old on guard, can you tell me about your relationship with Miss Diane? Do you feel like you have to be extra nice to her because she's not really part of your family? Michael looked confused and frightened by the question. Diane is part of my family. She takes care of me when I'm scared. But don't you think it might be better to learn to be brave without needing to depend on someone who isn't really your mommy or daddy? Diane watched helplessly as the psychologist led Michael through a series of manipulative questions designed to make his healthy attachment to her appear pathological. Every expression of love or trust was reframed as evidence of inappropriate dependency that needed to be broken for his own good. The social worker, meanwhile, was questioning Robert about his judgment in hiring domestic help and suggesting that his guilt over his previous mistakes was clouding his ability to make rational decisions about his son's care. Mr. Harrison, don't you think your son would be better served by professional caregivers who maintain appropriate emotional boundaries? The social worker asked. This level of attachment to a former employee seems concerning. By evening, the full picture of Victoria's revenge plot had become clear. Unable to complete her original plan to murder Michael for his inheritance, she had activated a backup strategy designed to destroy the child's relationship with everyone who had protected him from her. The custody petition painted Diane as an unstable woman with a criminal background who had manipulated a vulnerable child for her own emotional needs. It portrayed Robert as a grieving father whose judgment had been compromised by guilt and desperation. And it presented Michael's recovery as evidence of psychological damage rather than healing. They're going to separate us, Michael said that night, having overheard enough adult conversations to understand the threat. The mean lady in jail is still trying to hurt us, isn't she? Diane held him close, her heart breaking as she realized that Victoria's final cruelty was to use the legal system to traumatize Michael all over again. Sweetheart, there are some people who don't understand how much we love each other, but we're going to fight to stay together. What if they make me go live with strangers? What if I have seizures and you're not there to help me? The terror in Michael's voice was gut-wrenching and Diane felt rage build in her chest at the adults who were willing to traumatize a disabled child to serve their own agenda. That night, as Michael finally fell into an uneasy sleep, Robert found Diane sitting in the hospital corridor staring at the custody papers with hollow eyes. "Maybe they're right," she said quietly. "Maybe my attachment to Michael is inappropriate. Maybe he would be better off with trained professionals who can maintain proper boundaries." "Don't you dare," Robert said fiercely. "Don't let them make you doubt what we all know is true, that you love my son with a mother's heart, and that love has saved his life." But doubt had been planted, and as the legal battle intensified over the following days, Diane found herself questioning every interaction with Michael. Was her love for him healthy or selfish? Was her presence helping him heal or preventing him from developing independence? The darkest moment came when Michael overheard a phone conversation between Diane and her court-appointed lawyer, during which the attorney suggested that Diane might have better luck if she stepped back voluntarily to show that she had Michael's best interests at heart. "You're going to leave me," Michael said after Diane hung up the phone. "Everyone always leaves me. First Mommy died, then Victoria tried to make me die, and now you're going to go away too." The 8-year-old's breakdown was complete, sobbing, hyperventilating, begging Diane not to abandon him like everyone else in his life had done. The medical staff had to sedate him to prevent another seizure, and as Diane watched him slip into unconsciousness, she felt her resolve crumble. Maybe the psychologists were right. Maybe her presence in Michael's life was causing more harm than good. Maybe loving him wasn't enough if that love was being used as a weapon against him. For the first time since the custody battle began, Diane seriously considered walking away, not because she loved Michael less, but because she loved him too much to let him suffer for her sake. Sometimes the people who try to destroy love use the very system meant to protect children as their weapon. Have you ever faced a situation where doing what's right was twisted to look wrong by people with power? Share your thoughts about standing strong when the system seems stacked against protecting those we love. The turning point came not from lawyers or judges, but from an unexpected source, Michael Harrison himself. At 8 years old, with cerebral palsy and a history of trauma that would have broken many adults, he made a decision that would change the course of everyone's lives. It started during the court-ordered psychological evaluation on Friday morning. Dr. Amanda Cross, the child psychologist assigned to assess Michael's dependency issues, had been conducting what she believed was a routine session designed to prove that his attachment to Diane was unhealthy. "Michael," Dr. Cross said in her practiced clinical tone, "I want you to imagine what your life would be like if Miss Diane wasn't around anymore. Can you tell me about the things you would learn to do by yourself?" Michael, who had been answering questions politely for 40 minutes, suddenly stopped responding. He sat in his wheelchair, staring at Dr. Cross with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Michael, did you hear my question?" "I heard it," Michael said quietly. "But it's a stupid question." Dr. Cross blinked in surprise. "Michael, there are no stupid questions. I'm trying to help you think about." "You're trying to help Victoria," Michael interrupted, his young voice carrying a clarity that cut through all the adult manipulations surrounding him. "You want to take Diane away from me because the mean lady in jail told you to." "Michael, that's not." "I'm 8 years old, not stupid," Michael continued, his words measured and deliberate. "Victoria tried to kill me with poison medicine. Diane saved my life. Now you want to punish Diane for saving me and give me to people who work for Victoria. That's not helping me. That's helping the bad guys." Dr. Cross scrambled to regain control of the session. "Michael, sometimes adults make decisions that children don't understand." "I understand more than you think," Michael said, his voice growing stronger. "I understand that Victoria killed other kids before me. I understand that she was going to kill my daddy too after I died. And I understand that you're helping her finish what she started." The session ended abruptly when Michael suffered a panic attack so severe that medical intervention was required. But his words had been recorded, and they found their way to Detective Chen, who recognized something crucial. This wasn't the testimony of a traumatized child speaking irrationally. This was an intelligent young person speaking truth to power with remarkable clarity. Dr. Elena Martinez was in her office reviewing Michael's latest medical reports when Detective Chin called with an update that changed everything. "Doctor, we've been investigating the law firm that filed the custody petition. Sterling and Associates has connections to at least 3 other cases where children died under suspicious circumstances after custody was transferred away from protective caregivers." Dr. Martinez felt her blood run cold. "Are you saying this is a pattern?" "We're saying Victoria Sterling wasn't working alone. She's part of a network that targets wealthy families with disabled children, eliminates protective figures, and then ensures the children die under the care of people who will benefit financially from their deaths." The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Victoria and her associates had been running a systematic operation across multiple states, identifying vulnerable wealthy families and infiltrating their lives with calculated precision. The custody battle wasn't about Michael's best interests, it was about removing the final obstacles to completing his murder. Armed with this information, Dr. Martinez made a decision that would violate several professional protocols but potentially save Michael's life. She called Robert Harrison directly. "Robert, you need to get Michael out of that hospital immediately. The people trying to gain custody of him aren't just working for Victoria, they're part of the same network that killed other children in similar situations." Robert felt the world tilt beneath his feet. "Are you saying they're still trying to murder my son?" "I'm saying that Michael was right during his psychological evaluation. This custody petition is Victoria's way of finishing what she started. Once Michael is placed with caregivers chosen by Sterling and Associates, his death will be both inevitable and legally protected." Within an hour, Robert had assembled a team of private security guards and was preparing to move Michael to a secure location. But the legal system moved faster than they anticipated. A court order arrived at 3 p.m., demanding immediate transfer of custody to qualified professionals, pending the completion of the evaluation process. Hospital security was instructed to prevent Michael's removal by his father, and social workers were en route to take physical custody of the child. "We're out of time," Robert told Diane as they watched security guards position themselves outside Michael's room. "They're going to take him, and once he's in their custody, we'll never see him again." Diane looked at Michael, who was sitting up in his hospital bed with the kind of determined calm that she had learned to recognize as his way of preparing for battle. "Daddy," Michael said quietly, "remember when you taught me that sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices to protect the people they love?" Robert nodded, not trusting his voice to remain steady. "I want to make a hard choice too," Michael said. "I want to tell a judge the truth about Victoria and about Diane and about why some adults are trying to hurt us." Dr. Martinez, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped into the room. "Michael, you're only 8 years old. The legal system doesn't usually allow children your age to testify in custody cases." "Then we make them listen," Michael said with startling conviction. "Diane always tells me that when something is important enough, you don't let other people decide for you. Well, this is important enough." What happened next would be remembered as one of the most extraordinary moments in family court history. Michael Harrison, with the help of a child advocacy lawyer Dr. Martinez had contacted, petitioned the court for the right to speak on his own behalf about his custody placement. The judge, initially resistant to hearing from such a young witness, changed her mind when she read the transcript of Michael's psychological evaluation. His clarity, intelligence, and specific knowledge of the conspiracy against him convinced her that this child deserved to have his voice heard. The emergency hearing was scheduled for the following morning, and for the first time since Victoria's arrest, Robert and Diane felt something they had almost forgotten: hope. "Michael," Diane said as they prepared for what would be the most important day of their lives, "are you sure you're ready for this?" Michael looked at her with eyes that held wisdom beyond his years. "Diane, you saved my life when Victoria tried to poison me. Now I'm going to save our family by telling the truth." As night fell over the hospital, with security guards still posted outside Michael's room and social workers waiting to execute the custody transfer, a disabled 8-year-old boy prepared to take on a legal system that had failed him, armed with nothing but truth, courage, and the unshakable conviction that love should be stronger than corruption. The battle for Michael's life was about to reach its climax, and this time, the child himself would lead the fight. Sometimes the most powerful voices for justice come from those who have the most to lose. Have you ever witnessed a child show more courage than the adults around them? Share your thoughts about finding strength in the most unexpected places. The family courthouse on Monday morning was packed beyond capacity, with reporters, child advocates, and legal observers filling every available seat. Word had spread through the legal community that an 8-year-old boy with cerebral palsy was going to testify against a conspiracy to murder him, a case that would set precedents for children's rights in custody proceedings. Judge Patricia Reynolds, a 30-year veteran of family court, surveyed the packed courtroom with concern. She had presided over thousands of custody cases, but never one where the child at the center was simultaneously the victim, the witness, and potentially the key to exposing a criminal conspiracy. Michael Harrison sat in his wheelchair beside the witness stand, wearing his best clothes and the leg braces that helped him walk. Despite his young age and physical challenges, he carried himself with a dignity that impressed everyone in the courtroom. "Michael," Judge Reynolds said gently, "do you understand why we're here today?" "Yes, ma'am," Michael replied, his voice clear and steady. "Some people want to take me away from my daddy and from Diane, and they're saying it's for my own good. But it's really because they work for Victoria, and Victoria tried to kill me." A murmur ran through the courtroom at the directness of Michael's statement. The lawyer representing Sterling and Associates, Harold Blackwood, immediately objected. "Your Honor, this child has been coached by adults with their own agenda. His testimony is unreliable and potentially harmful to his psychological development." Judge Reynolds looked at Michael, who was waiting patiently for permission to continue. "Michael, has anyone told you what to say today?" "No. Daddy and Diane told me to tell the truth, but they didn't tell me what the truth should be. I already know what happened to me." Over the next hour, Michael's testimony unfolded with devastating clarity. He described Victoria's arrival in their household, the gradual changes in his medication routine, the secret pills that made him feel sick and scared. He recounted the psychological manipulation, the threats, the photos of other children who had gotten sick for telling secrets, the systematic isolation from anyone who might protect him. "Victoria told me that Diane was just a servant, and servants don't really love the children they take care of," Michael said, his voice steady despite the weight of what he was revealing. "She said if I got too attached to Diane, something bad would happen to both of us." Harold Blackwood attempted to discredit Michael's testimony by suggesting he was too young to understand the difference between fantasy and reality, but Michael's responses were precise, consistent, and supported by medical evidence that Dr. Martinez presented to the court. "Mr. Blackwood," Michael said during cross-examination, "you keep saying I'm too little to know what happened to me. But I'm the one who lived it. I'm the one who had seizures because of Victoria's poison medicine. I'm the one who almost died. Don't you think I would remember that?" The courtroom fell silent at the simple logic of Michael's response. Here was a child who had survived attempted murder, and the adults trying to protect him were suggesting he was too immature to understand his own experience. The turning point came when Detective Chun took the stand to present evidence of the broader conspiracy. She revealed that Sterling and Associates had been involved in 17 similar cases over the past 5 years, cases where protective caregivers were removed from vulnerable children who subsequently died under suspicious circumstances. "The pattern is consistent," Detective Chun testified. "Identify wealthy families with disabled children, infiltrate the household with someone posing as a caregiver or romantic partner, eliminate anyone who might interfere with the scheme, and then ensure the child dies in a way that appears to be related to their medical condition." Harold Blackwood's objections became increasingly desperate as the evidence mounted. Phone records, financial documents, and witness testimony painted a clear picture of a criminal network that used the family court system as a tool for murder. But the most devastating moment came when Dr. Martinez presented Michael's medical records, showing the correlation between Victoria's presence and the child's declining health. Michael's seizures increased by 300% after Victoria Sterling began administering his medication, Dr. Martinez testified. The drugs found in his system were specifically chosen to cause brain damage and death in children with his neurological profile. This wasn't medical malpractice, it was calculated attempted murder. When it came time for closing arguments, Michael asked Judge Reynolds if he could speak one more time. Against all courtroom protocol, she allowed it. Michael maneuvered his wheelchair to face the packed courtroom, his young voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "I know some grown-ups think kids like me are burdens," he said. "Victoria thought that. She thought my daddy would be happier if I was dead, and that she could have his money after I was gone. But she was wrong about my daddy, and she was wrong about Diane." He paused, looking directly at Harold Blackwood. "Mr. Blackwood, you keep saying that Diane loves me too much, and that's bad for me. But the reason I'm alive today is because Diane loved me enough to notice when someone was trying to kill me. The reason I can sit here and tell you the truth is because she fought for me even when my daddy didn't believe her." Michael's voice grew stronger as he continued. "You want to give me to people who work for Victoria's friends. People who think kids like me should just disappear quietly. But I'm not going to disappear. I'm going to live, and I'm going to have a family that loves me, and I'm going to make sure other kids don't get hurt the way Victoria tried to hurt me." The 8-year-old's final statement left the courtroom in stunned silence. Judge Reynolds recessed for deliberation, but everyone present knew that Michael Harrison had just delivered one of the most powerful testimonies in family court history. 2 hours later, Judge Reynolds returned with her decision. "In 30 years on the bench, I have never seen a case where the courage of a child so clearly illuminated the failures of the adults around them," she began. "Michael Harrison has demonstrated not only remarkable intelligence and emotional maturity, but an understanding of his own needs that surpasses that of the so-called professionals who claim to represent his interests." She looked directly at Harold Blackwood. "The custody petition filed by Sterling and Associates is not only denied, but I am referring this matter to the district attorney for investigation of fraud, conspiracy, and abuse of the legal system." Turning to Robert and Diane, Judge Reynolds smiled for the first time during the proceedings. "Mr. Harrison, Ms. Foster, I am granting joint custody and guardianship as requested. Michael Harrison will remain in the care of the people who have proven they will protect him with their lives." The courtroom erupted in applause as Michael wheeled himself over to where Robert and Diane sat, both of them crying with relief and joy. "We won," Michael said simply, reaching up to hug them both. "We're a family, and nobody can take that away from us now." As reporters crowded around seeking interviews, Michael had one final statement for the cameras. "If other kids are being hurt like I was, they should tell someone who will believe them. And grown-ups should listen when kids tell the truth, even if the truth is scary." The case would indeed set legal precedents, leading to reforms in how family courts evaluate custody disputes and how children's voices are heard in proceedings that affect their lives. Harold Blackwood and 3 associates were eventually convicted of conspiracy and fraud. Victoria Sterling received an additional life sentence for her role in organizing the network that had terrorized vulnerable families. But for the small family walking out of the courthouse together, Robert pushing Michael's wheelchair while Diane held the little boy's hand, the most important victory was simply being together, legally and permanently protected by the love that had sustained them through their darkest hours. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the most powerful truths. When children find the courage to speak up for themselves, they often shame the adults who have failed them. Share your thoughts about listening to young people when they tell us uncomfortable truths about the world around them. 3 years later, the morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Harrison family's new home, a sprawling ranch-style house designed specifically for accessibility, with ramps instead of stairs, wide doorways for wheelchairs, and adaptive technology that allowed Michael to control lighting, temperature, and entertainment systems with simple voice commands or touch panels. At 11 years old, Michael Harrison had grown tall and confident, his leg braces barely slowing him down as he navigated his world with the assurance of a child who knew he was loved unconditionally. His seizures were completely controlled now with proper medication, and his sharp intellect had made him something of a celebrity in academic circles where his insights into disability advocacy and children's rights were sought after by researchers and policymakers. Diane Foster Harrison stood at the kitchen island, reviewing the day's schedule while preparing breakfast for her family. The legal adoption had been finalized 2 years ago, making her not just Michael's guardian but his official mother in every sense that mattered. At 48, she had found the family she never knew she was searching for, and the fulfillment that came from nurturing a child's growth into his full potential. "Mom," Michael said, wheeling into the kitchen with his usual morning energy, "don't forget I have that interview with the Children's Advocacy Center at 2 o'clock. They want to ask me about the new legislation for protecting disabled kids in custody cases." Diane smiled at how naturally Michael had taken to his role as a spokesperson for vulnerable children. The Michael Harrison Act, passed by the state legislature the previous year, required family courts to give greater weight to children's testimony in custody cases and mandated that child advocates be present whenever a disabled child's placement was being decided. "I haven't forgotten, sweetheart," Diane said, handing him a plate of his favorite whole-grain pancakes. "And remember, Dad will pick you up from school for your physical therapy appointment at 4. Robert Harrison entered the kitchen carrying his laptop and the morning newspaper, his Saturday ritual of catching up on business reports temporarily set aside for family time. At 52, he had learned to balance his corporate responsibilities with his role as Michael's father, often bringing his son along to business meetings where Michael's presence reminded everyone that disability was simply another form of human diversity. The custody battle had changed Robert profoundly. He now served on the boards of 3 disability advocacy organizations and had established a foundation that provided legal support to families facing custody challenges involving disabled children. His company, Harrison Technologies, had become a leader in developing adaptive technologies that helped disabled individuals achieve greater independence. "Any interesting news this morning?" Diane asked as Robert settled at the breakfast table. "Actually, yes," Robert said, his expression growing serious. "Victoria Sterling died in prison yesterday. Heart attack, apparently natural causes." Michael looked up from his pancakes with the matter-of-fact acceptance that children often brought to difficult topics. "Good," he said simply. "Now she can't hurt any more kids, even if she somehow got out of jail." The investigation that followed Michael's testimony had revealed Victoria's network to be even more extensive than initially suspected. 17 children had died under suspicious circumstances after being placed in care arrangements orchestrated by Sterling and associates. The exposure of the conspiracy had led to a complete overhaul of how custody cases involving vulnerable children were handled, with Michael's courage serving as the catalyst for systemic change. "There's something else," Robert continued, pulling out a thick envelope from beneath his newspaper. "The National Center for Child Protection wants to honor Michael with their Courage Award. It comes with a college scholarship fund and a speaking engagement at their annual conference." Michael considered this news with the thoughtful expression he brought to all important decisions. "Will other kids be there? Kids who need to know that grown-ups will listen if they tell the truth." "Hundreds of them," Diane replied, "along with social workers, judges, and lawyers who work on these cases." "Then I'll do it," Michael said with characteristic directness. "But I want to write my own speech. I want to make sure they understand that kids like me aren't broken things that need to be fixed. We're just different, and different can be amazing if people give us a chance." Later that morning, as Michael worked on a school project about adaptive technology in his fully equipped home office, Robert found Diane in their garden, tending to the vegetables Michael had insisted on growing to show people that disabled kids can make things grow too. "Penny for your thoughts?" Robert asked, settling onto the bench beside her. "Just thinking about how much has changed," Diane replied, watching through the window as Michael video called his friend Sarah, another disabled child whose family had been helped by the Harrison Foundation. "3 years ago, I was just a housekeeper who got too attached to her employer's son. Now I'm legally his mother, we're married, and we've helped change laws that will protect thousands of other children." Robert took her hand, marveling at how perfectly their unconventional family had evolved. Their marriage 18 months ago had surprised some observers, but those who knew them understood that their relationship had been forged in the crucible of protecting Michael, built on shared values and mutual respect rather than romantic passion. "Any regrets?" Robert asked, a question that had become ritual between them. "Only one," Diane said with a slight smile. "I regret that it took a crisis for us to find each other. I regret that Michael had to suffer for us to understand what family really means. But if we hadn't gone through that crisis, would we have learned to value what we have now?" Robert asked. "Would Michael have developed the strength and wisdom that makes him such a powerful advocate for other children?" They were interrupted by Michael's voice calling from the house, "Mom, Dad, come see what Sarah's family did with their accessibility modifications." As they gathered around Michael's computer to admire photos of another family's adaptive home improvements, all three of them understood that their journey together was far from over. Michael's advocacy work was expanding, with invitations to speak at conferences around the country. Diane was pursuing a degree in special education law, determined to become a professional advocate for disabled children. Robert was developing new technologies designed specifically to enhance independence for people with disabilities. That evening, as they settled into their living room for Michael's favorite Saturday activity, family movie night with homemade popcorn and hot chocolate, Michael asked the question that had become part of their weekend routine. "Mom, Dad, can you tell me the story about how our family got started?" It was a story they had told countless times, but Michael never tired of hearing how love had triumphed over prejudice, how courage had defeated conspiracy, how three people from different backgrounds had become an unbreakable family unit. "Well," Diane began, settling beside Michael on the couch while Robert dimmed the lights, "it started with a little boy who was braver than all the grown-ups around him, and who taught them that family isn't about blood, it's about who shows up when you need them most." As Diane recounted their story, the seizure that brought them together, the false accusations that nearly tore them apart, the conspiracy that threatened to destroy them, and the courtroom testimony that saved them all, Michael listened with the satisfaction of someone who knew his own worth and understood his place in the world. Outside their accessible home, the world continued to change as a result of Michael's courage. New laws protected vulnerable children, new technologies enhanced independence for disabled individuals, and new attitudes challenged old assumptions about what children with disabilities could achieve. But inside their living room, surrounded by the warmth of unconditional love and the security of legal protections, three people who had found each other against impossible odds settled in to watch a movie together, content in the knowledge that some families are born from choice rather than chance, and that love, once properly recognized and legally protected, is strong enough to overcome any challenge that might arise. The little boy who had once been seen as a burden had become a beacon of hope for countless other children. The woman who had once been dismissed as just the help was now recognized as a mother and advocate. The man who had once let prejudice cloud his judgment had learned to see beyond surface differences to the heart of what truly mattered. And as the credits rolled on their movie and Michael fell asleep between his parents on the couch, both Robert and Diane understood that their greatest achievement wasn't the laws they had helped change or the technologies they had developed, but the family they had built together, a family that proved love could indeed conquer all, when it was backed by courage, commitment, and the unwavering belief that every child deserves to be protected, valued, and cherished exactly as they are. Sometimes the most important families are the ones we choose, built not from biology but from love, commitment, and the courage to fight for each other. What defines real family in your experience? Share your thoughts about the different ways people become bound together by something stronger than blood.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.